This is a formal invitation to the ninth house, and not just you and me, said Gideon more cunningly. And being dyed-in-the-wool traditionalists, shouldn't we make a teeny-weeny appearance? It'll look rude if we don't go. We can extrapolate heaps from whoever doesn't come, and everyone will, to be polite. Politics, diplomacy. I'll eat yours if you don't want it. The necromancer lapsed into brooding. But this delays finishing the trial, she complained finally, and wastes an evening in which Sextus can get ahead of us at his leisure. Bet you Palamedes will be there. We can do the trial afterwards, and I'll be so good. I'll be silent and ninth and melancholy. The sight will astound and stimulate you. Nav, you are a hog. But that meant they were going to go.
You're listening to Nun Pod with Left Grief, episode 15. Very correct pleasantries. You have such a lovely reading voice.
Well, thank you.
That was delightful.
And I used the pronunciation that Tamsin Muir gives us for the Master Warden of the Sixth House name. I don't agree with it, but I will use it.
I still go back and forth, just like willy-nilly.
Well, the note on names is, I think is trying to get it to line up, I suspect, with the D's nuts joke. It's a long E in the Greek.
We're here with Hannah, who you might know as the Pentiad, and we're so excited that she's here with us. Welcome, Hannah. What got you into the Locked Tomb, and how do you relate to it?
Well, I mean, I'd been involved in sort of various kind of sci-fi and fantasy fandom things when I was younger, and then I went through one of these sort of being too grown up for it phases, and then got over myself and got back on Tumblr and kept seeing people talking about this series. And I could not for the life of me work out what was going on in these books. People kept referencing things and they sounded very interesting, but most series people mention something and you think, oh, I can tell what's going on here. And eventually the curiosity got the better of me and I read it and never really got away. What I really enjoy about these books is it's, when you read a book and you think, oh, this author is, their brain's working in a way that mine works, that this is a world that's sort of dabbling its toes into all sorts of things from, it's making grandiose references to classics and theology. It's also making references on exactly the same level to Tumblr memes and, all sorts of bits of esoteric internet culture. And I really enjoy the sort of eclectic world that it creates.
You were my favorite Abigail cosplayer, and you also do a really phenomenal John. Who else have you represented? I know you've got like a literal Abigail.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the joke would be that I'm cosplaying my way through the questionable parents of the Locked Tomb series. Although I have also done Kitharea, but I've done Abigail, John, Juno, and Wake.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Talking about like what Tamsin Muir brings into her writing in terms of both these like higher concept things and then these like things that we're exposed to at a fast turnover with internet culture and memes. Palamedes nuts, which has never occurred to me before. And so I'm just like, to me, it's this beautiful thing where like it's so dense with these references and they are equally serious and ridiculous. And every reader has a different body of knowledge that they're accessing as they recognize these things. So one of the joys of having guests on here is realizing the ways that different people like recognize things within it. And I think the fandom, like that connection is strengthened by sharing those insights together. And it's, I think, one of the greatest joys of participating in this fandom for me.
Absolutely.
I think one thing that's so enjoyable as well is that Muir draws on just such a huge range of references that I don't think there's anybody in the fandom who's got all those little pots of knowledge that you need to interpret it all. And so we're all kind of coming together collaboratively and bringing different bits of knowledge in terms 100%. Of who's read Homestuck and who was on Tumblr in 2014 and who's read the Iliad and all these little bits.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's so much how I relate to this text. And when I was in my first year of college, I did, a general education English class that happened to be about war poetry. And one of the things that we did was we read The Wasteland by T.S. Eliot, which is entirely stitched together from references and allusions and other languages. And, he'll just say something in Sanskrit and expect you to get it because he's a bit of an asshole. And he he is said to have remarked about this poem that anybody who can read it and understand it has a complete education. But we don't actually have the level of like everybody's done classics education that existed when he wrote the poem in the interwar period in England as an aristocrat. Like that isn't how education happens anymore to a large degree. So the way that I read this poem was seated down with 30 other college freshmen. And we went through it line by line, and somebody would go, "Ooh, I know this is from the Iliad," and somebody else would go, "Oh, I speak French," and somebody else, And so we pieced it together. And I think that so much of how I interact with this fandom is I want to do that, but with these long ass novels, and there's nobody has time for that. But maybe we get a little bit.
Well, and I think so much of what people are doing when you look at how fans are interacting, in all the different spaces where this is happening online, and there is so much of somebody's going, "Hey guys, I just noticed something," and then people are just key smashing underneath, going, "How has it been this many years and we haven't picked up on this bit?" Or
Yeah.
and the joy that keeps coming from that and digging into it.
So our girls have done their first attempt at transference and winnowing. Harrow has passed out
Again.
again. And
Floor nap. Floor nap. Great phrase.
just a little floor nap. And now they're back in the ninth quarters, kind of setting themselves up for their next move.
I really love this conversation, continuing to establish the level of knowledge and familiarity and almost like expertise that Gideon has with necromancy. Like, Harrow is not explaining each and individual theorems, but she's perfectly comfortable explaining her theory of how to approach the test to Gideon without, like, she's called Gideon illiterate, but that's just because she's a bitch. Like, she actually does respect Gideon's intelligence enough that she's like, okay, this is what I'm seeing here. This is how I see you participating, and actually wanting to hear Gideon's thoughts about it to a degree.
I'd so love to know more about what Gideon's education has been like and how she has picked up all of this knowledge about necromancy. And, is that because she's just been observant of little bits and pieces over time, when they've all been in these very close quarters and slowly it's built up? Has she had a sort of piecemeal education where periodically people have sort of sat her down and rambled about the particular bit of osteomancy that they're doing at the moment? And so she's got strangely niche knowledge that most non-adepts wouldn't have. And we don't really know, how much of that is from talking to Harrow, for example.
Mm.
The only thing that we're really certain of is that, like, she was kind of in the nun track until she was 10. So whatever we're looking at the various great aunts, like, some of her foundational knowledge might be like parallel to that, but it stops quite early on.
Yeah.
So that in some ways also implies like what are foundational educations for children within the ninth, either necromancers or not.
It does seem like they're keeping an eye out for necromantic potential in young children because they knew by the time she was, what was it, 5, 6, something, that she wasn't a necromancer. So they were looking out for it and maybe doing the kinds of exercises that we see later with Nona, where, what if we just give you a bone and see what happens? What do you do with the bone? This chapter has several really subtle references to Wake, one of which is really, really fascinating, and one of which is patently offensive to me. In this early, just in the second paragraph, Harrow comments that Gideon's greatsword has always made her feel like it was judging her, which tells us that her feelings about the sword being cursed and hating her are not a feature of her later hauntedness. That was already happening.
I think that because there's a couple of references, I think, aren't there? Not, there's this one, and then obviously throughout Harrow the Ninth. And one thing that I love in these stories is the way that you get these references, and when you read them the first time, they completely work in context as just, she doesn't like the sword because it's something of Gideon's, or it's something different, or it's not something she's got control over. And you read over these descriptions, and it's totally normal. And then suddenly you realize why that was, and it takes on this completely different sense that no, the sword was judging you, Harrow, and quite frankly, it was probably right to.
Yeah, and I think it's really exciting that we get that clarification here, that that is not responsive to the specific conditions of Harrow the Ninth. But later in the book, offensively, I wish to fight Tamsin Muir about this. She does a mixed metaphor, which someone with her facility of language would not do except to do on purpose. That's not sloppiness. That's intentional. And what she says is they were both silent in that pause's pregnant wake.
Rude! Rude!
What the fuck, man?
That is rude.
That's not how you say pregnant pause. She made it bad on purpose.
God damn it.
It's interesting, like as the conversation continues and the invitation arrives, and just the ongoing kind of expression of things that, the way that Harrow thinks and how that comes to a different light with information we get later in the story. Mm-hmm. The fact that they're invited to this dinner party, and Harrow's first thought is it might be a trap, and her next thought is they're going to poison us all. Mm-hmm. And you sort of go, okay, yeah, we've established that Harrow's a bit paranoid. And then, of course, you get to the end of the book and you think, well, it's interesting that the first place that Harrow's mind jumps with the sort of parental figures is perhaps they're going to commit a mass poisoning.
Yeah.
This is what parents do, right?
That is how parents act. Oh no.
In a much more tame and mundane way with this same scene, I'm starting to develop a real affection to the way these series talk about paper.
There's clearly so many kind of like cultural levels of how you use different kinds of writing surface and how and why and what that communicates, and we're only getting little bits of people's reactions.
Yeah,
it's the whole thing of like the envelope is real paper, but the letter inside is flimsy. And this whole kind of thing about, well, obviously only the emperor would write the letter on paper as well. Are you using a paper envelope but not a paper letter? Is that a sort of, it's not a kind of ostentatious thing, but it is a communication that you can use it like this? Is there a sense that it would be gauche to use the paper even if you can afford it?
Yeah.
There's so many little...
Yeah, like maybe an envelope is reusable. So while it's a kind of a conspicuous status thing, it's also, not quite as much as like actual letterhead and something that is a single use only, really.
But what's interesting is that the envelope is labeled. And so is it reusable?
Yeah, not necessarily.
What's interesting is in As Yet Unsent, Judith has a whole aside about paper and about how both she and Camilla don't like the texture of paper compared to flimsy. And so it's not even about adepts maybe not liking to feel the thanergy of paper, but that there's almost something slightly kind of alien about it.
Whereas Gideon, we know, loves the texture and wants to just play with it.
And if we're looking at that from this like thanergy of paper angle, like Gideon's like, dead trees. Like it also speaks to a little bit about the larger ecological context of this world. Mm-hmm. And there's a lot of little hints like that, but I think this is one that continues to be reiterated quite conspicuously.
Yeah, it comes up a lot. So Harrowhark is terrified going into this, and Gideon is very aware of her fear but can't quite make sense of it. She likens it to her experience of waiting for surgery.
One of the things that we learn as the story goes on is just how much of her life Harrow has spent being afraid of everything outside of the ninth. That I think we've had at least 2 or 3 times, before this point, this idea of we're not going to become an appendix of the third or the fifth. We have this idea that people cannot know what has happened within the ninth house, and you never quite know what she felt she was there a point she was holding out for? Was it this tension just meant to go on for as long as it could? But there must be something really strange for Harrow, having constructed her entire life around the insularity of the ninth, suddenly being thrust into this situation.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not just like the insularity of the ninth as it's set up amongst the houses. It's the insularity of the ninth in that relationship and her need to create this extra layer of secrecy because of the situation with her parents. So now as a child, she's now desperately trying to navigate this larger political structure. And her best option is don't look. Don't look too close. That has been for 16, 17 years, her entire strategy. And you talk about is there some point where she's going to decide that she needs to pivot that strategy? And I think of that relating to that kind of logic. When I've approached that, I think I have a point at which I would pivot, but it's not. It's actually there's a constant narrative that justifies maintaining whatever normal I have been using so far to survive. And I think the same for Harrow. I don't think there's a point at which she would really actively pivot that way. I think it's pivoting because of Gideon. It's forcing her to have to recognize that if she wants to make the most of her cavalier, who is here, who is on board, she can't just be using this exclusive, isolating approach.
I think Gideon sort of has a more straightforward ambition that's driving her. She wants things and she's moving toward them. And Harrow seems to be really ambitious, but is actually really at the core driven by shame.
And of course, the subtext of quite a few of the interactions that we see during the dinner party is the realization that actually there's a whole bunch of people in this situation for whom this is a kind of pivotal or transitional moment. You think about that actually Ianthe and Coronabeth are going into that situation with probably a similar sense of urgency to Harrow, because how long would they have been able to keep up their semblance of both being necromancers? And well, one way out of that would be if Ianthe becomes a lictor, who's going to say no to a lictor, whatever they are doing? Harrow's wanting to become a lictor because, again, it allows the fragility of the ninth to come to light with protection. There's actually so many people coming into this situation trying to be very nonchalant, but the stakes are incredibly high.
And this is, we talked about early on in the podcast about, Gideon's relationship to power and to fascism and proximity to power being this idea of I can help people, I can make things better if only I had more power. But, both in the context of needing to replenish the lictors and the fact that they are incredibly unsafe under these circumstances, there's this story that they're going to gain agency, that they're going to gain power, that they're going to gain control over their own lives, because there's all this larger awareness that it's not, they don't, they're scared. It's a lie. That desire to be close to power, it's so fragile. At any point that can be shattered and taken away from you. And you don't really feel it in these moments until you look back at oh, they needed saving now. How do we get them out now?
I love that the way that Gideon responds to the teens has shifted just a little bit in this chapter, from totally not differentiating between them to Jean-Marie and what's-his-face.
I love Jean-Marie so much. I love every time I see her name, I just love her so much.
Yeah, I have a lot of feelings about both of them.
This is Jean-Marie in this chapter. I'm excited when we get to biceps.
I think also the interesting thing with her kind of being identifying Jean-Marie and getting this, this note from Magnus written on the invitation is that Gideon is starting to develop these little sort of, French associations within the Cavaliers. And obviously one of the things that kind of comes out of this chapter is the fact that Harrow has been completely avoiding everybody up until this point, but actually that Gideon has been interacting, even though Harrow has, imposed the vow of silence and really tried to get her to not be engaging in that way.
Yeah.
And one of the great tragedies of chapter 15 is that you sort of see everybody coming together and you see this little glimpse of, hey, maybe if everybody wasn't at each other's throats. And then, of course, it, goes in a rather different direction.
Yeah. Yeah. And it illustrates the fact that, like, even though Harrow is like thirsty for information and strategy, her choice to alienate herself from everybody is in fact starving her of certain contextual information that Gideon has. And she's starting to realize that Gideon is an asset specifically in that interrelational way.
Yeah, and it's really interesting that that is happening despite the vow of silence, and in some ways because of the vow of silence, because as we've discussed on previous episodes, people are not worried about what they say to her because they think that it's a sealed box. She's a great listener. She's a great bug in this way because she could actually be this flow of information to Harrow. And it's really interesting in this chapter to see who Gideon really understands as a fleshed out specific person like Magnus, and who is just sort of a body who's like also there that she's got much less information about. Like she's really clear on who Magnus is, but Marta is just also at the table.
I think of Nibirius, he feels like he's always like a little bit between the two. Like he's not a whole person. He's not a cardboard standout, but he's like a 2.5 dimensional trope.
He's a caricature, yeah.
Yeah.
Abigail has forgotten their anniversary, which I find just dreadfully charming.
You just get the sense that she, from what we see of her in the river bubble, that she's just so delighted combing through Canaan House and finding bits of paper and 10,000-year-old pens under the sofa in the library or whatever, that she's not entirely keeping track of the time there.
Yeah, I think she has no idea what day it is.
And there's a beautiful, dynamic there of like, Magnus's affection and support to the way in which she does that. Like he's talking about, collating her manuscript. Like he's so proud to help uphold that way of her. Like
yeah, he is not embarrassed that she forgot their anniversary. He's not hurt by it. He's like, I got to turn it into a dinner party, but he's not bothered.
Not in the slightest. But also, I imagine too, like someone who approaches, everything the way that Abigail would, like that dinner's gonna be fucking delicious.
Yeah.
So I've had the delight of having dinner with Han and Han's wife, and we've eaten amazing food together, like nerds. Like that kind of nerd makes really good food.
Hey, you were very involved in making that very good food.
Thank you.
I think also, it's like right from the beginning, you get this sense that they are quite a double act.
Mm-hmm.
And that they are sort of, there's this sense of, they're both very aware of how the other person is operating and gently kind of supporting and picking up, and and some of that is just how they mutually support each other. But you do feel that there's also a level of that very much being how they kind of present themselves as well. It's interesting that Magnus is very much presenting this as kind of, Abigail forgot her anniversary and offered to make me dinner, and I said we should invite everyone to dinner. And then they get to dinner, and teacher basically immediately corners the ninth and is like, just so you know, these guys are politicians. It's interesting that there's that tension right from the beginning.
Yeah, and even in the moment where Gideon sort of encounters Abigail up close for the first time, obviously she was present in the ring ceremony, she was present in passing in different times, but the first time that Gideon really like gets to meet her up close, it's a really conflicted description because she's described as easy and unaffected, but also having an intense stare that is like inappropriate and notable. So it's both like, oh, she's totally relaxed, and also she's a lot.
I love that how that description ends with that sort of like she would have been intimidating, but she was wearing an apron
Hmm.
or something like that.
Yeah.
Like this sense that kind of the only reason that she's not a little bit kind of uncanny is that
Yeah, she's so domestic in this moment.
And I think that's part of that political awareness too, where, they're aware this is their first kind of face-to-face, more emotionally intimate interaction with the rest of the people at Canaan House. And they do want this to be a disarming experience. Yes, there's a political underlying motivation there, but I think a piece of that political underlying motivation is they don't feel like this is a competition.
yeah.
And they want to extend that approach and invite other people into that way of looking at it.
It
Um,
does seem like Abigail has presented herself as sort of folksy overall because there was also a previous description of her that she looked more like a farm wife than a necromancer. She is this extremely famous scholarly historian, but she's doing a bit of a cottagecore moment.
I feel like there's sort of, there's something very kind of British, sort of interwar British aristocracy about the fifth. And you do sort of get this kind of when you get these old photos of the Queen out at Balmoral being very sensible in her kind of tweed and her galoshes, and you get the feel that that's the sort of sense sometimes that's coming there of just, I don't need to be glamorous. I'm here and I'm present, and my engagement in this is sufficient.
and
Which
there's a
is
kind of like I am one of you in that as well. Like it's removing those layers of conspicuous markers of status to create like more aesthetic commonality.
Gideon notes that teacher seems perennially pleased to see them for no reason that she could figure out. And I want to offer possible explanations here and see what you think. Explanation one, he actually is just not actively being an asshole, and she has no frame of reference for that. And so she's like, why is he so into us? And explanation two is he can recognize that she's God's child, and he's excited about it.
They're not
Oh,
mutually exclusive.
yeah, because we don't know other people's perspective. Maybe he's being that chatty with absolutely everybody, because he does have his whole thing to Harrow about like, oh, you're missing out by not coming and socializing with everybody. And we have him talking about having had a lot of conversations with Abigail about Canaan House. I think he's probably incredibly lonely.
Mm.
Unless we assume that they were all sort of turned off and put in a cupboard for most of those 10,000 years. He seems to be the one that's up at a kind of human level of functionality. You get the slight sense that the other two priests they sort of seem to lag occasionally, but teacher does seem to be a kind of fully realized person, whatever that means for the combination of people that he is.
Hmm.
And so for some of it, I feel is he's just absolutely delighted to get to interact with all of these people. But yeah, the idea that he might realize something about Gideon is, oh,
And we've speculated in earlier chapters of like comments, as the shuttles were landing and things that he was saying about the seventh, about the third, like layers to that implied a greater understanding of the situation than us as readers had. I feel like both end is the most satisfying one, but like a third one, and we've kind of added this into the conversation is like his utter delight in humanity.
Hmm.
yeah.
Like he really just loves people. Like the way he talks about the teens, like just in general in the world, how often do people refer to teens in this language of affection? Like he's like just aesthetically just he treats them with the same joy and affection with like I don't there's just yeah, there's just this like deep love of the human experience.
Which is what
That
makes it so horrifying. And he knows exactly what all of those people have been brought there to do. Just think about
Yeah.
his comment about the third, well, it's not a problem until the end, and it's only a problem for them.
Hmm.
And I think about his I think a lot about teachers programming. Like, who made his personality? Who is he an expression of? Because he's a work of art.
Hmm.
Really. He is someone's work of art. And I kind of want to know what that person was thinking as they put that beautiful work of art together.
I'd also love to know what how much of his sort of programming or something, aspects about how he is perceiving things, what connection that has to John, because there's his whole, self-introduction. He says, "Oh, I stand in the stead of the, God above death." But that's really interesting language, right? That stand in the stead thing. So in Catholicism, when they're acting in certain sacramental capacities, so like when they're, when it's the Eucharist, when it's confession, a priest is standing in persona Christi, in the person of Christ. They are representing God's power there. They are the person, they are themselves, but they're the way that they are sort of understood and focalized. And I'm just like, that's the fact that he's using that kind of language that's drawing on this very specific kind of Catholic theological idea about how the priest mediates and represents the power of God. Like, what does that tell us about, what teacher's relationship to John is?
And it also, as an extension of that, gives us a little insight into John himself. John's fingerprints are on teacher. He is an intentional expression of John's priorities within the empire. So there's just a little bit also of how John thinks of himself in how teacher speaks of John.
Well, you get the same tension that you get in John between, I'm just a guy, I'm your buddy, and then suddenly retreating into this very hieratic language and this great comfortableness with the divinity of John.
Yeah, I was talking to a friend of mine recently who trained as a bouffant clown. We were talking about archetypes within this art form and the ways in which they can be more maybe modernized to be more relevant and less problematic. But one of the ones that remains relevant is this character of the high priest. And so you have this character who has the larger picture and the larger story, and as such is an intermediary of power, but manipulating it such that maybe not everybody knows the whole picture. It actually kind of really beautifully dovetails because there's a deep truth telling in it where the priorities of power are really expressed, but this individual still has a subtle agenda of their own. Even though teacher, yes, is explicitly a tool of John, there's this other compassion towards the people that he's interacting with that's not it's not indifferent. It's not it doesn't have a neutral impact on his way that he relates to them. He wants them to succeed in some way. He doesn't really want harm to come to them, but he's also deeply complicit in the harm that is inevitable.
Well, because there doesn't feel like there's a break in his personality when we then meet him in Harrow the Ninth,
Hmm.
and he is being, actively critical of what happened at Canaan House.
Yeah.
Um, you can feel this is the same person, this is the same motivations, but he's just not constrained or kind of directed in the same way that he was before.
Yeah, and because he has this deep insight into the structures of power that he fits in, now we finally have a little more insight into maybe even how he sees his relationship to his position as a cog within that system of power. Tamsin Muir obviously likes puns.
Hmm.
This joke of Magnus's, just wonderful. Wonderful. No notes. And the fact that Corona's just so on board.
Corona loves puns.
Corona loves puns. Hot girls love puns.
The kind of awful sort of thing you think about, though, when what do they all have in common? The same middle name. And it's the fact that they're all, the conventions of how they're referred to really is designed to emphasize that they are sort of a tool of their house. They
Hmm.
don't get their arithmonym. They, you
Yeah.
know, And it's interesting to see when the Cavaliers are asserting their titles or their arithmonyms, despite the fact that the convention seems to very much be making them first name the house number.
Yeah, and which is a similar pattern, after the ascent to lictorhood, where you are really denied yourself as a whole person. You are a facet of an empirical structure.
Mm-hmm.
There's the whole thing, Harrow and Ianthe kind of meeting up behind closed doors and referring to each other by their arithmonyms, as if this is sort of kind of forbidden now.
Yeah. And we see that as Gideon is referred to as Gideon the Ninth for the first time by teacher on arrival, she hates it. It's an upsetting moment for her.
Yeah. Yeah, and because she's experienced all of this dehumanization in her life, but it seems to me like this is one where like it was just Harrow, it was just the ninth. Now she's outside in the world and she's super stoked about being more than just an indentured servant, but she's like, right, right, okay, gross.
Well, because she knows so little about cavaliership from outside of the kind of romanticized military context that she's seen in her comics.
Yeah.
And it's interesting. You then have her as this slightly external observer, and she's watching things like how Babs is being treated and how Colum is being treated, and being really pretty horrified by it, despite the fact that she is somebody who's suffered an enormous amount of terrible ill treatment in her own life, because the way that she was treated as a serf was, it was there's a level of expected brutality. Harrow talks about there being what would seem to be sort of legally permissible amounts of hitting your serf, but cavaliers are meant to be this honored position, this respected position, and you can tell there's a real kind of horror that Gideon doesn't necessarily want to analyze too closely, about realizing that actually, in many cases, these people are being treated terribly.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I think this ties back to what I was talking about, about this, like, somehow this illusion that it gets better the closer you are to power. Like, historically, we have tons of examples of people whose day-to-day experience was very intimate with people in power. Lords of the chamber, people who were kept as pets, who had access to so much information that had so much potency to it, but at the cost of their dignity and humanity and ability to make their own choices of their life.
Well, and even later, as things start to really deteriorate, and you get Babs kind of going, oh, well, I should have stayed home and gotten married. You never get the sense that that's him going, oh, I wish I'd stayed home with the person I loved. You get the sense that I should have been directed through a different structure that I have no say in.
Exactly.
That he would have been some kind of, this is how we strengthen the alliances on this side of the branch of the Iden royal family.
Mm-hmm.
Which, I mean, actually, when you think about this idea of all of these people at Canaan House being very, very privileged people, but in many respects, as you were saying, very constrained by being in these positions. And of course, one of the things that's interesting about everything happening here in the context of the 5th anniversary dinner is that although we don't hugely know, the 5th do seem to have had a lot more latitude to do things because they want to do them,
mm-hmm.
rather than because they're obliged to. I mean, I don't know what, all of the currents have been in their lives, but when a lot of the discussions around marriage seem to involve people in their very early 20s, they get married in their late 20s as old friends with, what would seem to be some kind of slight gulf of status between them. They've evidently been able to make decisions and to have a degree of autonomy that isn't typical for a number of the other people at Canaan House. And I wonder also how much that factors into this sense of the fear of how these people are going to interact in this circumstance, that on the one hand, they're tradition, but part of the thing of wielding the power of tradition is wielding the power to manipulate that and to decide when it's dispensed with, and that there may be the people who have the power to go, well, that's going to happen, or that's not going to happen, in a way that other people might not have felt able to.
I tried to map out the actual seating chart. There was not quite enough information.
No.
I got what I think is a serviceable guess.
Are you certain there is not enough information?
Yes.
Okay. That's great.
Yeah.
I trust your ability to solve a logic puzzle. I just wanted to totally understand how you had approached it.
There isn't complete information,
Okay.
but there's rather a lot of information. And I started off with the idea that Gideon and Hera were almost at actual opposite ends. And I come to the conclusion that Gideon actually has to be more central. And there's one end of the table that she's ignoring, because the problem came up with Pal was talking to no one at one point if Gideon was close to one end. So in order for Pal to not be absolutely insane in this scene, they have to be sort of in the middle. So
well, that does solve the problem, because then all the unaccounted for people are just off at the other end of the table, aren't they?
So I charted who is said to be in specific positions relative to one another, and also who talks to who. And there's clues about who's within earshot of Gideon, but also who Gideon can see. And it seems like all the priests are quite close to one another, because Gideon remarks on them all making the same facial expression at the same time. And she's not super interested in them, so she wouldn't be like looking around to check each individual priest, like she doesn't care. It seems like Teacher is certainly not sitting close to Gideon, because otherwise he would be annoying her and we would be hearing about it. And there are clues like the salt and pepper priest receives clarification on the joke from someone. And so it's got to be someone that Gideon doesn't know well enough to name specifically. And it can't be another priest, because the third priest also wouldn't get the joke, and Teacher would have been named specifically. And so looking at all the people left, it almost has to be Judith who clarifies the joke.
Can we say that's canon? Judith likes puns?
Judith at least gets puns.
Fine.
There's all these interesting conversations that happen and don't happen at the table. Like Corona and Magnus have to be sitting quite close to each other because they're playing puns together. Marta doesn't talk to anyone, as far as I could, like, as far as Gideon notices. Marta is sitting at the end of the table with Silas across from her and Harrow to her left, and nothing ever happens to her. No one is talking to Marta. She's having what seems to be a pretty shitty time.
If I was sitting there, I also would avoid talking to them. To be honest, those two are kind of creeps.
I mean, the suggestions that we get about who is sitting next to who, you think about, because we get the whole, the fifth's idea of fun was a seating plan or something.
Yep.
And you do think, okay, so we've sat the two teenage heads of opposing religious institutions near each other. What do we think is going to happen here?
And we have a previous example where Silas won't eat near Harrow.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So, like, I'm assuming this is something that Abigail and Magnus are somewhat aware of. So they're just being like, deal with it, boy. It's kind of audacious in a way that I quite admire.
I believe they've done it twice as well in the seating chart that I have figured out. And this part is hypothetical, but I believe we know for sure that Silas is diagonal to Harrow. I believe that Column is diagonal to Gideon.
I mean, Magnus is so critical of Silas in Harrow the Ninth. There's this idea that, something terrible's happened to Silas, and Magnus is going, good riddance. Didn't like that kid anyway. You have to assume there's been some disagreement. I'm sure Silas would only have been entirely polite about their marriage in light of the sermon on necromancers and cavaliers. Sure, that has nothing to do with it.
In my proposed seating chart, Silas and Magnus are 6 seats apart.
And Magnus has probably made the seating chart.
Silas is as far away from Magnus as a person could be, while still putting Magnus pretty close to the middle of the action. Also, Pal and Dulcinea are diagonal to each other and both interact with Abigail, but not one another. So we don't see it happening, but this is a moment where Palamedes is getting extremely clear information that Dulcinea is not who she claims.
Because she goes off on that whole, oh, I'm the kind of pity case that they roll out at parties. And of course, when we actually see the real Dulcie and the way she wrote to Cam and Pal, explicitly saying she hates that kind of way of thinking.
And it wouldn't be plausible for the real Dulcinea not to interact with him.
Yeah.
I think Cam is way down at the end with Judith and Corona, which sounds like a great party.
Yeah, yeah, I'm okay with that. Honestly, I think sitting with Corona anywhere is a great party. Like she knows how to like make the time nice, regardless of how extraordinarily shitty the situation is. Like she's good at that, and I respect that about her.
Yeah.
I also do love the idea that Judith and Corona have been sat near each other, and whether there's been some picking up on, because you do get this impression that at least the third and the fifth and the second have all moved in the same social circles and do actually know each other quite well. So it's entirely possible that the fifth have been seeing this going down and sit them next to each other.
Yeah. It seems like there's some intentional choices being made.
Yes.
Which, in my opinion, like further strengthens the theory that Cytherea is seeing the fifth as a threat, not just for like academic informational reasons, but for like social political reasons.
Yeah, they're very, very clever.
I think that one of the reasons they were targeted so early on was this very obvious compatibility in a way that Cytherea would have clocked as like, these two are going to figure it out real fast and get on board real fast, and they're a threat.
Oh, I think so. And I always wonder, because we do get this layer of detail about the idea that there's a sort of social taboo about relationships between necromancers and cavaliers, and the idea, therefore, that Magnus has done something quite sort of controversial, at least in the eyes of other houses, even if it's normative in a fifth house context, in becoming her cavalier. And I do wonder if Cytherea kind of has looked at this situation of, well, he's already proven that he's willing to do something, to take a hit for his necromancer, that from her perspective, that might not be, oh, they're husband and wife, they're never going to go for this. That might be, they work very closely together and he's totally willing to take that hit.
She's brilliant. He's committed and understands the way she operates so intimately. And they're very, very savvy. And they're creating an allegiance amongst the entire group that is also a threat to Cytherea's plans.
Well, yeah, because I mean, they're coming in and they are very much trying to, Magnus gives this whole speech about how, oh, we've all been so far apart and, we're all together finally. And it's so interesting because I think it speaks to how much Cytherea cannot actually, for all that she's like, we need to end what John's doing, she cannot fathom a logic outside of the logic of what John is doing, because she can't see that none of these people, Barianthe, would make that choice to become lictors. She can't see that people cooperating is positive, because she has her whole spiel at the end about how the houses are competing and they're so divided and this is terrible. She is criticizing that, and ostensibly the fifth are saying, hey, we agree with that.
The threat to both Cytherea's plans and to the structure and story and narrative of the empire in general happening, like at risk over this dinner. Like if they were just to openly talk about how fucking weird this situation was, like this is the beginning of an insurgence. Like the communication blackout. Like there's all these things that like this is this disarming moment that also is so politically potent.
Yeah.
And she's like, all right, number one, those two.
I am so excited to hear this explanation because I had been working on the assumption that Abigail was targeted because of her historical interest in Canaan House, that she was so excited to get into analyzing the lictors. And so I had thought of like her as being kind of epistemically threatening, that she had the greatest threat of uncovering Cytherea's secrets. And I think that this is a both and, but also like a stronger explanation and certainly in combination. And I think with respect to the threat of lictorhood, the fact that Cytherea and Abigail talk about Abigail and Magnus's, the infertility almost removes a possible barrier to lictorhood because having children would be a really good reason not to eat your husband.
Oh, and the succession's sorted out. You know, it's going to go to my brother. He'll be great. My only real priority is the book.
Yeah, which you can do if you eat your
Which
husband.
I've been married to for longer than I have Magnus.
And the concept of having forever to work on her like the only thing that would get me to agree to immortality is the thought of all the books I could encounter and read and write. Everything else about it sounds awful, but as a scholar, that's a good deal.
I think you talking about the threat of Abigail's work exposing Cytherea. I feel like that's maybe why it happens that night that Cytherea because there's the whole little bit before Gideon loses interest where Abigail's going, oh, I think I found unencrypted communiques. You know, so she's revealing that she has found some literal texts, which, you know, of course, we learn in Howard the Ninth are all, you know, people writing down potato recipes and things like that. You know, it's nothing hugely exposing. But I think that's probably why Cytherea goes, no, I need to get her out of the way now, because as you say, she could uncover something. You know, people do later find photographs and things like that she, you know, you do get the sense that Cytherea has killed her and then gone off and sharpied over all the photos. But I do think that had that not happened, that dinner party would still have created this sense of these people need to be removed from this situation.
So this chapter has like really interesting contrasts of different beats. We start off with this fairly academic conversation between Harrow and Gideon. Then we go into this like political conversation between Harrow and Gideon talking about the value of going to the party. In previous chapters, we have kind of a continuity of approach. Mm-hmm. But this chapter has a lot of really contrasting things against each other because like after this, we go right into Ginmery and biceps, which like, not gonna lie, my favorite part of the chapter. It's ridiculous. It is a ridiculous little pocket within this quite serious situation. I enjoy it for its just existence, but I cannot think that Tamsin Muir put it in there just so that I could enjoy it. Like, it's a little bit odd. Is it there just to endear Ginmery to us, to show us why I hate Tamsin Muir later on for breaking Gideon's heart about that beautiful child? I don't know, but like, it's to me such an interesting anomaly compared to the other notes of this chapter.
I think we get a lot of little moments in the snippets that Gideon is frustratingly not listening to because I want fuller sentences and whole paragraphs. But we hear these little bits from all these different people that feel like they're actually relaxing into the moment to different degrees and sharing a little bit of who they really are. Gideon hears somebody talking about what seem to be pomegranate seeds and talking about the botanical
and not
details.
At all ominous thing for people to be eating at this stage in the proceedings.
Oh my gosh. First of all, this dish sounds amazing and I want to make it. It seems to be fluffy white rice boiled in onion broth with chopped nuts and pomegranate seeds.
Wait. I just about okay. Actually, I have a solid theory because I almost made a dish just like this recently.
Is it spicy?
It's got like paprika as a core spice to it. So
Gideon usually eats porridge. That could be spicy to her.
So it recently was Rosh Hashanah, and I wanted to pick a few different like Jewish dishes historically to do that. And there's a beautiful Sephardic dish, a rice dish that is classically served at Rosh Hashanah that is, I think it's like jeweled rice, I think is maybe what it's called. But when you describe this like fluffy rice dish with nuts and it's aromatic and is served in this like from this rich broth with these bright seeds, that's like that's what I have ingredients for on my counter right now.
Because I was looking up some of the ingredients, and jeweled rice was what I came across as well.
Yeah.
But I found it in the context of Persian jeweled rice as apparently being a traditional wedding food, which I thought was interesting in the context of it being their anniversary.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Which, gives us perhaps a little bit of a glimmer into their cultural backgrounds.
Well, this is where I want to know is this something that has, despite, the mind wipes of the resurrection, survived as a kind of cultural memory in some aspects of house culture? Is this something that survived outside of house culture and has been kind of brought back in the way that, various empires bring back recipes from the places that they colonize? It raises really interesting questions about the survival of cultures either within the houses or outside of the houses.
And we do have fantastic examples already so far of Muir using like really striking food examples to just kind of give a suggestion about the situation, like a bag of porridge, protein goo. Like these are really quite interesting descriptions, and like flaky white meat.
Hmm.
Like both the familiarity and the foreignness of Gideon's experience with these foods is also kind of telling as well.
Though it's interesting that they know exactly what the kind of food is. They know it's a sarcatesta. They know it comes from a red seed apple, and they absolutely know that this is the correct kind of food to put it into. But they're not talking about it like it's a familiar ingredient.
That does seem to be two different people, though.
Yeah, but
The
nobody in that conversation is talking about it as if it's a familiar ingredient,
Oh yeah,
really.
they're not naming. Oh, pomegranate seeds. I love these. I haven't had them for yeah.
Yeah, you get this. There seems at least one person in that conversation seems to kind of conceptually understand that what these
Hmm.
things are, but nobody's going, oh yeah, that thing, we grow those in the greenhouse on our space station.
Hmm.
Um,
And it also leads to some interesting questions about agriculture on the first. Because like why would they have all this fresh fruit still? Like have they been maintaining certain like where did this fresh fruit come from? Greenhouses, but like yes, that they would be there, but why would they have been maintaining these plants that have a limited lifespan?
Hope springs eternal. John wants to come home.
John doesn't like change.
I mean, that's reason enough. I think it's intriguing.
It might
Like,
also be easier to maintain crops of things like fruit trees than to reestablish them because, a fruit tree takes years before it starts giving a crop. You can't just decide that you want to have a ripe fruit tree, a mature fruit tree on the day.
we were coming to an equinox, like what at the beginning of the book it was talking about the relationship to Dominicus that they were having. So we might have a little bit of insight also into the seasonality of these fruits and when in the year this is all happening.
Yeah, it was the equinox on the 9th. Although seasonality in greenhouse grown foods is trickier. In general, pomegranates are in season September through December, but I don't know how greenhouse would change that.
Yeah.
It's interesting while we're sort of talking about time and seasons and things like that, and we get this little glimpse of Silas talking about his typical eighth necromancer's fast until evening. And it fascinates me he uses the term evening. I mean, this man lives somewhere near Uranus. He's not, well, probably. That seems to be by process of elimination where the eighth might be, but he's not anywhere that's getting solar days that function in that kind of way. So it says something interesting about either how the terms for the structure of the day persist through habitation structures or something like that.
I honestly sort of treat this the way that The Lord of the Rings works, where I assume that this is an in-world term that has been translated for me. But it's interesting to see, yeah, presumably one of the eighth talking about the necromancer's fast until evening. I suppose, yeah, it would be Silas. Silas and Palamedes are talking about extremely sort of public information. They're sharing things that are facts that you could get from the house wiki. They are
Yes.
not sharing anything personal, whereas you've got someone else talking about their birth story.
That's, I think, Judith, because in the cohort intelligence files, she says she was born interstellar.
Mm.
There's a lot. I mean, it's interesting, actually, in all of these conversations, there's so many of them touch on birth, fertility, marriage, this sort of nexus of, because you have Judith's birth story, then you have Ianthe and Corona's birth story, you have Cytherea asking Abigail about whether they have children, all of those references coming together. You have Gideon wondering whether Ianthe and Silas should be married.
Mm-hmm.
It seems to be on everybody's minds in some way.
Yeah, and I think that really points to the suggestion that it's not just the ninth house that's been collapsing secretly, but that there are deep population concerns across the houses, and people are really anxious about marriage and fertility and childbearing and neonatal health.
Does this give us, I think yes, does this give us an implied position in the timeline in terms of the lifespan of an empire? Like we have these aristocratic groups that have been, constructed to, in some ways, silo knowledge, and in other ways to uphold a political structure, but they are internally collapsing because they are artificial and they can't maintain themselves based on the structure that they were established on. And to me, that says that they are in a certain, they've exhausted the pool of resources that they could artificially maintain themselves on. To me, that says something about the state of the larger empire. And we also have allusions to, and I don't know how to describe what that point is, but it feels like it's something specific.
You certainly have the sense that the lictoral trials themselves have been kind of something John has maybe avoided up until he really couldn't avoid thinking about them anymore.
Yeah.
I think what's interesting coming up in all of these stories is realizing that the things that we know are issues for the ninth, that they are keeping very secret, maybe seem to be issues elsewhere. Perhaps this is suggesting that other places are having issues with resources, having issues with maintaining their systems themselves. One thing that we get during the conversations that Gideon overhears is what is probably in retrospect one of the first instances that we get that these people are in our world, are speaking, probably speaking English, probably, descended from words and phrases that John and the lictors used, is because Abigail makes a casual reference to the Holy Grail.
Yeah.
She talks about how valuable being able to be in Canaan House is for her research, and she says it's a holy grail. And you skim over it and you just think, oh, well, this is, as you say, that thing of almost treating it like, oh, this is something being translated for us, that it's just translated her going, oh, this is a unique thing, this is really important. But then you realize in retrospect that this is probably a phrase that has been used by somebody like John or the lictors to mean a unique thing, an important thing, a really significant thing. And it has come down in-house as a language such that she's just casually using this to mean a really significant thing.
Has Abigail heard of Jesus?
Well,
I think she just understands it as a Holy Grail means a really significant thing. I don't think she has any. It ironically is a fairly appropriate contextual use of it, given that this is the sort of, she is essentially a sort of early church historian for the purposes of the kind of historiography she's doing. But I don't think she has any sense of what that word means beyond that contextual usage.
But doesn't it also tie into like Arthurian legend?
Yeah.
which I think is also an interesting thing because of the table that everyone's sitting around and the fact that, the knights of the round table start to disappear over time. Like there's also some I've never thought about comparing Arthurian legend stuff to Loch Tomb, but now I kind of want to do a little more of that.
Isn't Palamedes comes from, there's the sort of Homeric figure, but isn't there also an Arthurian Palamedes?
Yes.
Oh ho. Oh ho.
His coat of arms, it just looks like a checkerboard.
Nerd. Check. Fuck, I used to know what that was called.
It's,
Checky? Is it Checky? Is it
I
just
believe
Checky?
it is Checky, Argent, and Sable.
Checky, Argent, and Sable. Okay. Checky.
You want to call somebody a nerd again? He was known as the Saracen in Arthurian legend. He converts to Christianity later in life, and unrequited love for Isolde brings him in frequent conflict with Tristan.
Oh ho!
Ouch.
Interesting.
Oh, he was my favorite. I just didn't remember. Palamedes is the hunter of the questing beast. The questing beast was my favorite as a child. It is an abomination that only he can kill, and the hunt is extremely frustrating and long, and every time he thinks that he's going to get close to killing it, it doesn't quite happen. And then at one point, he finds the questing beast in the wood and it's badly injured, and he nurses it back to health so that he can keep hunting it. I love the questing beast. I didn't realize that was Palamedes. I like Palamedes more now.
Also, I love the reference to Harrow talking to Pro and it taking him a sort of long period of silence to formulate his replies. And Gideon just going, I guess that's just how he talks.
Yeah, he's just weird.
Is Harrow realizing already that there's something going on here?
It seems like Cytherea is having a little bit of difficulty keeping up two conversations in this hectic environment, that she's trying to listen and follow her own conversation while also getting Pro to respond appropriately. And that's like a little hard.
Yeah.
Where would you seat Pro if you were trying to test to see whether he was a puppet? Who would you sit him near?
Corona.
Yeah, I think I would too.
I would put him right near Corona and Magnus so that Magnus could keep an eye on him and make sure that he was being drawn into conversation.
Yeah, I think Ianthe might have an interesting time clocking it, but like wouldn't do it in a helpful way.
He is next to Ianthe canonically.
So maybe interesting. Okay.
She is fully positioned to notice how weird the interaction between Protesilaus and Harrow is going.
Well, you do get the reference, I think it's later, where Babs talks about how Pro is sort of nothing like his reputation. And obviously he's mostly talking about dueling in that case. But you do wonder to what extent people have some sense of him and him not quite matching up to that. If he has a reputation as a duelist, did he publish any of his poetry?
Has Pro done any dueling? Because he wasn't part of the Cav training session.
No, I mean, he's been sort of deliberately scarce, I think.
Yeah. So it seems like Nibirius has to be responding mostly to his personality.
Yeah.
Ianthe would also benefit pretty significantly from taking Nibirius and Corona more seriously as sources of information. Not that she needed it, it turns out. Yeah, so as they're milling about at the end, having tea,
watching the skeletons clear up.
yeah.
The presence of the sort of servant labor of the skeletons throughout the dinner, actually. There's all the reference to them serving, to them giving Gideon seconds, to clearing the courses. The fifth are hosting and have obviously been quite involved in the cooking, but there's definitely a level of this having been really made possible by the labor of the skeleton servitors.
And it would be hard to imagine two people hosting a spontaneous dinner party for roughly 20 people without extra labor.
Yeah. But also, you get the whole, oh no, retainers, no attendants. I mean, that all of these people are very used to being in environments with presumably, a large number of servants. Even, in Harrow the Ninth, Harrow hallucinates the body as a serving sister. For many of them, maybe this feels much, very normal, because suddenly, oh yeah, there are.
Yeah, yeah, and it seems like there's a mix of skeleton and living servants that might vary from house to house, but yeah, all of these people are, with the exception of Gideon herself, very class privileged and would be used to that. And Gideon would be used to it in having been a servant.
And then the absolutely devastating line, it was one of the first times she had felt full and fat and honestly happy about it.
She wanted to eat a dessert and she got to eat at least 3 desserts.
And then everything goes terribly for the rest of the book.
So we have this sweet little biceps moment. And
Biceps, 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 biceps. But I do like it is delightful, but it is also this like moment in identifying that like this is a child. These are and like Gideon is physically mature enough that we are framed as her body is more adult because Jane Marie is seeing her body as like distinctly more mature than hers. So this it's one of those moments where it kind of is like both within their aesthetic, the jangly earrings and the orange hair and the dark eye makeup, like they're really, really strikingly set apart from the rest of the group, really, both in their body and in their presentation.
They still are able to express themselves like that because they still are children and in a kind of children's role. When Harrow imagines Isaac in the cohort in the river bubble, she describes all his empty piercings.
I really love the moment of correction from Abigail to Isaac, which is, we've seen many, many corrections that have all been necromancer to cavalier. And this is the first time we see a correction that's necromancer to necromancer. And it is also the gentlest and sweetest correction. She just places her hand on him without even pausing her conversation, which is such a mom move that she's like, hey, be nice to your Cav. And he totally gets it. He understands what he's done wrong. He is embarrassed. And she does not even look at him. She does not pause from what she's doing. And it's the sweetest insight into their relationship.
But it's also so galling because Cytherea looks at it, and that's what prompts her whole thing to Gideon about, oh, the houses are so badly arranged. And, the real sort of sadness of realizing that the fifth and the fourth have this very, sweet and loving familial relationship, that the fifth have evidently been parents to them for a very long time, but that their relationship is also unavoidably political, that Abigail and Isaac are both, heirs of separate houses. There's an acknowledged, political maneuvering going on between those houses, and this sense that their relationship can never just be that parental one.
Yeah.
And I mean, I wonder to what extent what was going on between the fourth and the fifth, given that it is a sort of, feudal society in many respects, whether that was a kind of wardage that, Isaac's father had died, and we get the sense that his other parent would seem to still be alive, but he's shipped off to this other house who take charge of his education, who we learn were apparently in the process of arranging a marriage for him. You do wonder if the fifth house was profiting off his lands as baron, which would have been part of that kind of setup, which is not to in any way diminish the relationship that they clearly do have, but that they are, all of the parties in that are caught up in a much broader political system that is not great.
They might have also anticipated benefiting from his cohort prizes that normally would have gone to his own house.
Yeah. It's the great tragedy in that little family is also something rather bigger and more sinister. But I mean, that's the case with all of the found and assembled families that we get throughout this series. There is tremendous and real affection, and there's stuff going on that is not great.
Yeah.
And the way that those economic incentives warp what could otherwise be something really sweet on its surface.
Yeah.
And even Nona, like in the expectations that are on her, like she cannot just be herself.
Hmm.
It's just never been an option.
Calamities brings Dulcinea tea, and she does not respond as he expects her to. He is receiving information, but he is also having a whole lot of really intense feelings that Gideon can't totally clock.
Yeah, and Gideon's really trying to work out why is he seeming to be going through so many emotions.
Yeah, yeah, it's like it's something like horny, but it's not exactly horny.
But I think this is the thing. Gideon is very perceptive. She is real, even if she's not able to grasp exactly what's going on, she's picking up that there are multiple levels to his feelings and is at least trying to sort of ballpark them. And I think when people kind of say, oh, Gideon's she doesn't have a clue what's going on, she is very perceptive. It's just
Yeah.
that she's working with very limited information and is selective in what she is interested in.
And
Yeah.
and and how she uses that information, like so many other people in this room have been trained in how to analyze, synthesize, contextualize information based on the societal systems that they're in, based on the relationships, based on necromantic theorems. Like Gideon doesn't have any of that cognitive training. She's perceptive, but once she has it, she's like, okay, like, and moves on.
I think she just also is missing context. She doesn't know that they should have a pre-existing relationship because Pal and Cam are keeping that quiet because for whatever reason, Dulcinea isn't acting right. And they're not letting anybody else know that this isn't how she ought to be responding.
Yeah.
And then she's so devastated latterly when she realizes that she's been sort of unknowingly becoming part of the tension of this whole unfolding situation, even though, of course, she could not have known and wouldn't have been expected to have been aware.
I personally think that Dulcinea withheld this information as a clue,
Oh, yeah.
but of course we don't know.
I like to think of Dulcinea as someone that Calamities loved as an intellectual companion as well. Like I can't imagine him being as deeply curious about someone who didn't stimulate him intellectually. And so like the idea that they would leave like puzzles and clues and like that is absolutely part of it, as I would imagine that that relationship being developed. Like whoever Dulcinea was, she was clever, extremely clever, and knew how Calamities thinks very, very intimately.
Hmm.
And also recognized possibly the gravity of the situation and that like if there's anything she can possibly do to warn Calamities, she'd very much want to.
I almost wonder if there's a parallel, though, in terms of trying to come up with a plan that will work that doesn't take into account because you can't, the broader context. So thinking again, similarly about how Powell, his whole plan about trapping himself in his bones relies on, oh, and then Harrow will be there and we'll sort it out right away.
I
Yeah.
love that the
Buddies.
basic mental model that Calamities has for what it's like to know a woman is she is brilliant and will solve the problem.
That's cute. I like that.
Harrow, having sat next to the eighth and the third, is now very sure that the eighth is just about to catch up to her. She's concerned that the fifth is just about to catch up to her. And so, having had this big meal, she is absolutely dragging Gideon down
Let's
into
go,
the
let's go,
basement
let's go.
once again.
Yeah.
She's so outraged that Abigail and Silas are talking, that, Harrow has unilaterally decided this is a competition, and how dare other people be comparing notes?
Hmm.
Fuck. And then we come to the line that I need to fight Tamsin Muir about. So I'm listening to this coming up to the recording, and totally forgot what the last line was, and just like full on shouted, just like fuck, like loudly, probably enough someone could hear me in the hallway. I know everyone in the fandom needs to fight Tamsin Muir, over about something. We love you. If you're hearing this, we love you. We don't actually want to fight you. But this line is just such one of those examples where she's like, the culture of our community is that we hurt each other affectionately.
My version of that moment is in the keyring ceremony scene in Harrow the Ninth, where teacher presents the issue of the sleeper, and the fourth then sort of go, oh, do we have to go down and fight the monster? And then the pause is described as having fallen and lain there bleeding out. I'm not going to be mad forever about that.
30% of forever.
Well, I think that takes us to the end of our chapter. So our spooky girls are headed back down into the dark, and everything after this point sucks.
Thank you for being such a wonderful guest to usher us from the innocence of the early book into the horrors yet to come. It has been a delight having you.
Absolutely.
It's been fantastic. Thank you so much for having me on. I've so been enjoying listening to the episodes before this. So it's been great fun to get to come on and nerd out about my favorite necromancers and cavalier to whom nothing bad is going to happen. They're going to have one more glass of wine and call it a night, and definitely not go down to the haunted basement and die.
Amen. Nun Pod with Left Grief is created by Claire Beans and Han Cayley and edited by Han Cayley. Our music is Only Human by Philip Ayres. Today's cover art features guest Hannah as Abigail. Visit us at nunpod.com, that's NUNPOD.com, and get our attention online with hashtag nunpod. Thanks for listening.